Biden crime family IRS whistleblower Joseph Ziegler shows up on CNN in the lion's den to combat the standard narrative. And we've played many clips from CNN and other mainstream media sources saying that these whistleblowers are not credible, that Gary Shapley and Joseph Ziegler, who happens to be a Democrat, by the way, are lacking in authenticity, that they are corrupted in some way, shape, or form, and that they're not reliable. Even though we've gone through Shapley's record, we've gone through Ziegler's record, we know that they were on the investigatory team specifically looking into Hunter Biden and the Biden crime family, and they've got a firsthand account of all of the discrepancies that have been shared with us as Americans. Merrick Garland told us that David Weiss, who was the U.S. attorney leading the prosecution, had full authority. But David Weiss says maybe not. And these whistleblowers say absolutely not. And so while CNN wants us to believe one thing, the whistleblower, Mr. Ziegler, is now showing up here on CNN, and he's taking it to Jake Tapper. And it's enjoyable. Here it is.
IRS Special Agent Joseph Ziegler joins us now. Thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it. Let me start with just the big picture here. What is your main allegation you're making about this investigation into Hunter Biden?
Well, I wanted to thank you so much for having me on your show. I think it's important that your audience hears essentially what I presented, facts, yesterday in my testimony.
Right.
So my main allegation is the equitable treatment of taxpayers. We have to treat every taxpayer the same in investigating our cases with Department of Justice. And I think that's important, that everyone understands that to have a fair justice system, we need to treat people the same. It doesn't matter what your political beliefs are. It doesn't matter how much money you have. Everyone should be treated the same.
Right, and the suggestion is that Hunter Biden was given special treatment and the U.S. attorney did not proceed as aggressively as he would have had Hunter Biden been someone else. So David Weiss, as you know, the U.S. attorney, said in a letter to Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan, quote, "I have been granted ultimate authority over this matter, including responsibility for deciding where, when, and whether to file charges." I read that earlier. It wasn't just in this letter. He said it in multiple letters. Do you think he's not telling the truth?
So it's not, I don't know his intentions with what he stated there, but what I can tell you is the facts. I know, based on conversations I had with assigned prosecutors, that he went to the Washington, D.C. U.S. Attorney's office, bringing the case there. They told him no. He had to...
He wanted to charge Hunter Biden here in D.C., you mean?
So he wanted to bring the case there in D.C. to charge for the 2014 and 2015 tax years. They told him no. And I think it's important that in his letter, he said that his authority is geographically restricted to the District of Delaware. And if he needs to go outside of that, he needs to ask to partner with these other U.S. attorneys' offices. And if they say no, then he needs to ask for that special attorney authority. And he was assured that.
The special counsel authority.
No, he says special attorney authority. And I think it's important that you understand that they haven't turned over a document that says, here's the letter where we gave him the special attorney authority. And all we're trying to do is say that if this were anyone else, if this were Joe taxpayer, he would be getting a much different treatment than what was at place here.
And he knows that because he's been investigating Joe taxpayer for years. So is Gary Shapley, some of the most experienced people ever, actually. And Shapley, who was, I think, his superior in some ways, was the lead on teams investigating multi-level, multinational criminal syndicates. And so they know very, very well what the ramifications are for other types of crimes that are in the same wheelhouse as Hunter Biden's were. Let's get back
Well, you're saying that there would be other charges in other jurisdictions. Is that what I'm taking from this?
Right. So they told us that Joe Biden kept David Weiss, who was a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney, and that somehow legitimized this entire investigation because it was a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney. The problem with that, though, is that when he went over to D.C. to file charges in D.C., the D.C. attorney, which was appointed by Joe Biden, said no. So a Trump-appointed attorney who has to get permission to do anything from a Joe Biden-appointed attorney is really kind of like a Joe Biden-appointed attorney because he has no authority outside of the confines of the Biden safety net.
So the prosecutors assigned to this case...
Because he was charged. I mean, he is going to go before a judge. I mean, it's not like he's not facing anything.
Yeah, a misdemeanor
I'm not
and a
excusing
diverted
it, but
felony.
I'm just saying there are these allegations and he is going to face a courtroom proceeding, etc.
So the four assigned prosecutors of the case agreed with recommending felony and misdemeanor tax charges for Hunter Biden. David Weiss also agreed with that, and I know that from a meeting that I had with him in late August, early September. And on top of that, you have David Weiss essentially, so they all agreed to charging the felony and misdemeanor. So DOJ policy on this is that Their tax policy is that if you have a felony with a misdemeanor, you have to charge the felony, and that's to prevent inequitable treatment of taxpayers.
And they didn't do that, is what you're saying.
And according to the charging document, they only charged 2 misdemeanors, and one of those tax years related to 2018.
So let me just give you an opportunity.
Which is amazing. So, oftentimes from a public perspective, it's hard to get a prosecutor's policies. So you might go into, attorneys will generally get them because we deal with prosecutors so much, or you deal with judges so much. If you go into a judge and say, hey, what's your policy on DUI sentencings? Do you include the day, or what do you do? They might tell you, well, I look at every case in front of me, uniquely and all this stuff. But you know exactly what the policies are. And internally, they've got policies. This is how we handle prostitution cases. This is how we handle first offense DUIs versus second offense DUIs. First offense, whatever. And here, he's giving us an inside look, peering into what their policies were. All right, if you got a felony and a misdemeanor, the felony's got to stick. They didn't do that in this case. They reversed it. In other words, the misdemeanors are sticking and the felony is being diverted away. It's a literal flip. And it's also on minor charges, much less significant than the other charges, because the other 2014 and 2015 cases, they were delayed so far that the statute of limitations just were allowed to expire, and they fell off. It's amazing.
I needed to respond to some of the things that Democrats on Capitol Hill are saying. First of all, they're saying, why would a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney, David Weiss, lie?
So I have no idea what his motives or what his beliefs are. All I can do is present the facts to Congress, and it's for them to determine, and the American people and the administration to make the proper decision on how to move forward.
Because he's a DOJ lifer. He lives in Delaware. He's in Delaware. He's got the entire Biden apparatus up his butt, along with all the Democrats. And there's a lot of pressure to bear on somebody like that who's been there their entire lives. They keep using Trump appointed as though it's like this escape out of jail card. That exonerates everything. Well, he's Trump appointed. Okay. He still has the entire Department of Justice, FBI, IRS, Merrick Garland, the power of the White House breathing down upon his neck to come to a certain conclusion. That doesn't mean anything to you?
So let me ask you another question. So you're a 13-year veteran of the IRS, is that correct?
I am.
Okay. Is this the most
pretty good
high-profile, most potentially politically sensitive case you've ever worked on?
Yeah, I would say so.
And when you say that you saw abnormalities in this case, like what other cases are you comparing it to? Just the normal Joe taxpayer case?
So I'm actually working an even bigger case than this. Not as sensitive as this, but an even bigger case than this. And I can tell you the assigned prosecutors in that case have not acted anywhere near what we were going through, being constantly hamstrung, not following normal process. The storage unit location that we wanted to do the search warrant on. I think that it's important for people to understand that we had a plan to move forward. Even David Weiss agreed with that plan, but then they were at the same time telling defense counsel that we know about this storage unit and that you need to turn over the records. So we were relying on him and his counsel to turn over those records to the government versus us going and getting those records.
So
yeah, this guy's just totally out of, one of these things is just not like the others. Prosecutors are generally get the phones, get this, get his wife, get his ex-wife, get his kids, get his mother, get his father. Oh, he's dead. Get him anyway. I don't care. And they want it all. Does he know that we're searching it? Oh, he doesn't know that we're searching it? Well, let me tell him. And he says, that doesn't feel exactly right here, Jake.
You testified yesterday you wanted to interview President Biden's grandchildren, Hunter's grown children, right? They're adults. But you were told, no, you couldn't. Even without those interviews, you still had enough evidence, in your view, to recommend charges because he was deducting things related to them that he wouldn't be allowed to deduct in his taxes, right? I mean, so you already knew the crime had happened. The argument would be, you don't need to talk to Hunter's adult children. You already have the evidence that what he did was wrong. So tell me why that's not a satisfactory answer.
So when we work our tax cases and it's an expense.
You already had enough evidence. You don't need to talk to everybody, right? Which is amazing because what is Jack Smith doing? I'm pretty sure he scraped through Mar-a-Lago to get all the evidence out of that entire facility. Because that's what prosecutors normally do. And if this were the same energy being pointed towards Joe Biden, this would have felt very different as well.
That is deducted as a business expense on someone's tax return. You have to essentially, they're presumed that that's a business expense until you prove that it's not. So part of it is going to the third party to get those records. That's one step. And then interviewing that person to determine why was that expense made. And then a lot of times those witnesses could lead you to other things. They could lead you to other evidence, expenditures that might have been made related to them.
So obviously it's a politically sensitive case. And I don't disagree with you that theoretically everybody should be treated equally before the law and in investigations like this. One question I have is, you and Shapley have not produced any evidence of criminality by President Biden. When they say that, is that correct?
So what I can tell you and what we stated yesterday, we are working with the House Ways and Means. We are...
To get President Biden's taxes?
No, we are working with the House Ways and Means to any records that Congress has asked for related to this investigation. We are working through the process. They can vote on whether or not to release those to the full Congress. And that's the process that is a part of being a whistleblower.
So this was cited, and you were called before the committee because they're talking about, the House Republicans are saying that the federal government has been weaponized against conservatives and Republicans. They give any number of examples of there being very aggressive treatment of Republicans, and in their view, in their characterization,
Trump gets prosecuted, Hillary doesn't. Right.
You are a self-described Democrat. You worked at the IRS for 13 years. Is that an accurate description based on what you've witnessed in those 13 years?
So I'm not going to speak to the weaponization of the government because I don't think that's appropriate for me. I'm just going to present the facts as I know them. I think one of the big things that I mentioned yesterday was we need to have an independent attorney with authority to come in here and see and make sure that things were done correctly to the law. And I think it's important that there may be ancillary offshoot cases from this that are sensitive, that need to be investigated appropriately, that may not have venue in Delaware, so we don't run into that same exact problem. And that's all I'm trying to say, is that we need to have someone in there to look at that.
All right, so very interesting conversation there with Joseph Ziegler, Jake Tapper, and I think he has great answers for every one of Tapper's questions. And he's very careful not to speak too much or out of pocket. Says, I'm working with the House Ways and Means Committee, giving them the information they need. They'll be the people who determine where this goes. One of the people that is on one of those committees is Jim Jordan. And he, of course, is on the Judiciary Committee, as is James Comer. And we've got clips from both of those gentlemen here.
People are going to watch this hearing very closely. Yeah. It's going to be televised, and hopefully, they will get a better understanding for the level of criminality that the First Family has participated in over the past decade.
So those hearings are coming up, and of course we'll hit the highlights on those. And now we've got Jim Jordan, who's going to be giving us an update on what the Judiciary Committee is up to.
Yeah, I do think if you step back, there's sort of three fundamental questions here, Maria. The first one is, what were the Bidens doing to get the money? I mean, 20 different shell companies, 9 different Bidens getting paid. What was the service? What was the product? What was the value they add? The only logical explanation here is it was access to then Vice President Biden, maybe even before that, Senator Biden. The second key question is, was he really involved? Was it just Hunter Biden's operation, or was Joe Biden involved? It sure looks now like he was, based on this confidential human source and the information we got in the 1023 form, thanks to Senator Grassley. And now I think we're at the important final stage of this whole thing, which is, who are you going to believe? The two whistleblowers whose testimony has been consistent, or the Garland-Biden Justice Department, which can't get their story straight? David Weiss has said 3 different things over the last month and a half about how he handled this investigation, what authority he had. The whistleblowers have been true, consistent, and their testimony has not wavered. So I think now that's the important phase. And frankly, that's the phase, that's the part that the Judiciary Committee is really going to examine. Because David Weiss, Maria, said on June 7th in a letter to me, he said, I have full authority to determine where, when, and whether to file charges. And then 23 days later, he wrote me another letter. And he said, I stand by what I wrote, but to clarify, but I want to add to it, he said, I actually don't have full authority. My authority is limited to his U.S. Attorney's District. Well, which is it? You can't have full authority and then say you're limited. Yeah. And then just a few weeks later, he wrote Senator Graham and changed his story yet again. And I think that is the key, and that's what we're going to be looking into.
Well, what does AG Merrick Garland have to say about all of this? Did Merrick Garland perjure himself by telling you he didn't get involved here?
Great question, because what's so interesting was when I first wrote the Attorney General clear back in February asking about the special counsel, whether there should be a special counsel for the Hunter Biden investigation, he doesn't write me back. He doesn't answer. And they always give you a response. He doesn't answer. I write him again, the Attorney General. Again, he doesn't respond, but guess who does? David Weiss, the U.S. Attorney in Delaware, who's supposedly handling this case. That in and of itself is unusual. So the Attorney General has been pretty quiet, other than what he testified to, which is David Weiss has full authority, but now David Weiss tells us he doesn't. And more importantly, Gary Shapley and Ziegler both told us that all through this investigation, The investigators and the prosecutors were on the same page. And then something happens near the end of 2022, October of 2022, it all changes. And that's this now famous meeting where David Weiss tells Mr. Shapley and others of the investigative team, he says, I don't have full authority. I asked for special counsel status. Main justice wouldn't give it to me. That is the key distinction. He asked for it and he was denied, is what Mr. Shapley says. Mr. Garland says, no, he had full authority. He could have had special counsel if that's what he really wanted. Those are the two different stories. We got to find out who's telling the truth. My gut tells me it's the two whistleblowers.
Yeah, I think I agree with that totally. But there's a debate about special counsel now that's also taking place. And we got to be careful. There's a distinction between special counsel and special attorney and who can do what. And the question, of course, is also, do we want a special counsel? It would be somebody appointed by the Biden administration through Merrick Garland, right? They would appoint somebody who is supposedly fair and independent, but that would give them a full opportunity to drag this thing out years, and who knows how long it would take. And they could then button it all up in a nice little force field of a special counsel investigation that could take who knows how long. And if that's compromised, well, you get nothing.
This is a question for the full conference, but I will tell you this. The Speaker has been very clear. Speaker McCarthy said, if we have to go to an impeachment inquiry, we will, in fact, do that. It sure looks now, based on all this evidence that keeps piling up, based on what Senator Grassley released this week with the 1023 form, what we heard from the whistleblowers this past week, and the conflicting statements from the Justice Department, it sure looks like we're moving in that direction at a pretty quick pace. But ultimately, Maria, that's a question for the full conference, Republican conference in the House of Representatives. We will do what the Constitution requires if that's where we need to go, but we have to figure that all out. One thing I do know is if you head down this road, it completely consumes Congress. As you know, I was on the other side of this when Democrats did their ridiculous impeachment of President Trump 4 years ago, and the amount of time and focus it just demands from the Congress is huge. But if that's where we need to go because that's what the facts say, and that's what our constitutional duty is, then we will, of course, move in that direction.
Sounds like you might be a little bit skeptical on bringing those impeachment charges because it really does gobble up a lot of the bandwidth throughout Congress. But we'll see if there's enough there to incentivize them to correct this, or do they just want this to continue forward? We've got another, year and a half of the DOJ doing whatever the heck they want. What's it going to take for Congress to do something about it? We'll see.